Madara versus Isshiki. Who would win in a fight? Now I know a couple of you are actively trying to jump to your computers to strangle me for even recommending that Madara would stand a chance in combat against Isshiki, as no iteration of Madara would come anywhere near close to Baryon Mode Naruto in terms of strength. Right? Well, maybe. But what if Madara was brought back to life with the perfected body that Kabuto created for him? Both Rinnegan, Hashirama's cells still grafted to him, and therefore the ability to still use Hashirama's Sage Mode. Perfected would release the 6 paths and access to the Limbo. And then what if on top of all this, he still had access to his Sage of 6 Paths chakra, and he was Indra and Asura's reincarnation simultaneously? Well, as crazy as all of those abilities lined up together sounds, that's actually just kind of a complicated way of saying all of the abilities that Madara had access to towards the end of the 4th Great Shinobi World War. So surely this iteration of Madara wouldn't be able to stand a chance against Isshiki, who could fight adult Naruto and Sasuke simultaneously. Right? Well, apparently that's not for me to answer. See, because about a week ago, we started covering a fan-made spin-off manga called Madara that explored an alternative timeline in the Naruto universe, where Madara is brought back to life by Hagoromo to try and save the world from the Otsutsuki threat. And in that first video covering this fan-made manga, we talked on the first 3 chapters of this story. And thus today, I'd like to talk about chapters 4 through 6, where Madara goes toe-to-toe with the likes of Isshiki, and it's a lot closer than you'd think it would be. But that's absurd, Nick, right? I mean, Madara wouldn't stand a chance against Isshiki. This is fan fiction at its absolute highest, right? Well, maybe. But this iteration of Madara does have access to a bunch of abilities that work perfectly counter to those of Isshiki's. And thus, when contemplating who wins in a battle between Madara and Isshiki, well, I think I'm actually willing to defer to Deontay Art, the author of Madara's manga, on that one. But with all that out of the way, with no further ado, let's get directly into Madara chapter 4 through 6 explained. So, chapter 4 picks up exactly where chapter 3 left off. And if you guys haven't seen my breakdown of the first 3 chapters, I recommend watching that before watching this video. It's called Madara Spin-Off Manga Explained. It's like 4 videos back. But anyways, chapter 4 picks up where chapter 3 left off, which is Madara having a conversation with a masked hooded figure who seemingly intercepted his space-time ninjutsu. Now, Madara stands in silence in front of this anonymous figure, who opens up the conversation by saying, "I cannot believe it's the real Madara Uchiha who stands before me." But once again, Madara says nothing. But when enough awkward silence passes by, Madara says to this cloaked figure, "Think whatever you want. I don't care. When will all of you learn that standing in my way isn't the best idea?" And as he says this, he shoots out a chakra rod from his hand, poised to stab this anonymous figure with it. Now, this black chakra rod extending from Madara's hand seems to imply that he still has complete and total control over the Rinnegan's paths, as these black chakra rods are often used by people like Nagato or Obito to either place rods in somebody else's body to control them via remote chakra signals, or to just stab people and interrupt their chakra flow. Now, Madara continues staring down this maybe foe as he asks him, "Are you willing to tempt your fate?" But this maybe foe immediately identifies himself as anything but that, as he tells Madara, No, I have no intention of ending up anything like those soldiers," referencing the legions of soldiers that Madara cut down the second that he was reincarnated and broke out of his test tube. Rather, this hooded figure actually grabs his hood and becomes a non-hooded figure, as he reveals a head of seemingly Uchiha-like hair. In fact, he looks like he has Hebi Sasuke's haircut. And as he reveals his mask and his hair, he lets Madara know, "I'm here to help you. My name is Shiro. I am a mere observer, but before we continue this conversation, allow me to place an advance in the cup of our trust." And as he clasps his hands together, he reaches up into a created cloud of smoke and pulls out Madara's gunbai. Now, for those of you who don't remember what the gunbai is, it is a legendary weapon carved out of a mystical tree that was passed down through generations of Uchiha. It has the ability to deflect all incoming jutsu and blast them back at the opponent as wind release. In this sense, the gunbai operated eerily similar to that of the Yata mirror on Itachi Susanoo. While Obito was the original wielder of it in the 4th Great Shinobi World War, when Madara came back to life, Obito actually gave the gunbai back to Madara. Now, the fact that Shiro was able to find and hold on to the gunbai seems to imply that he has some kind of Uchiha lineage, but that's curious. I mean, control over space-time ninjutsu and owning the gunbai does seem to point in the direction of Shiro possibly being an Uchiha, but the only possible Uchiha that we know of in this universe outside of Madara are Sasuke and Sarada, and in this universe, Narita, who's an OC insert from Deontay and the youngest daughter of Sasuke and Sakura, but we'll get to her later. Anyways, Shiro flings the gunbai at Madara and he snags it out of the air. And And as Madara grabs his exalted weapon, raising his ridiculous power level even higher, he says out loud, "You managed to intercept my space-time ninjutsu, and you even rerouted it at your own discretion, didn't you? Is this your pocket dimension? An interesting ability. It seems as though the talent of shinobi is not quite gone." Now, naturally, when one hears pocket dimension, they think Kamui and therefore Sharingan user. However, rather interestingly, in the next panel, we see Shiro's eyes, or at least one of them. And the eye that we see is not that of a Rinnegan or a Sharingan. It's just a standard human eye. However, the other eye is blacked out, and that's most likely purposeful. Now, Shiro begins to think to himself, bingo, not even a minute in, and he's already deduced the secret behind my technique. But then again, what else did I expect from the Madara Uchiha? Even now, barely back from the dead, he is extremely dangerous. I should be more careful. However, it's this point that Shiro realizes that he's been standing in silence for maybe too long, unless he tells Madara both of those are correct observations. It appears that even death cannot dull your skills, but my technique is not what's important right now. And once again, we focus on Shiro's right eye, but only his right eye. As he says, I'll say it again, I am asking for your help. Otherwise, why would I return the blacksmith his hammer? Referring to him giving Madara back his gunbai. However, Madara doesn't seem all that interested in a conversation with Shiro. As he says, well, you've returned my gunbai, the next best thing you can do is stay out of my way. But Shiro diffuses the situation by saying that the gunbai will only ever truly show its highest level of potential and power in the hands of a rightful master. And before you show me what that peak power looks like by possibly killing me, allow me to make you abreast of the current situation on Earth. Now, it's this point that Shiro tells Madara that he's been gone for a long time, and like a really long time. Mind you, Narita, the OC of Deontay Art here in this story, is 18 years old, and she's the younger sister of Sarada. If we're assuming a similar age split between Narita and Sarada, as Himawari and Boruto has, that means that Sarada's probably somewhere in the region of 22 years old, implying that the events of this universe are 7 to 8 years even after what's currently going on in Boruto right now. Shiro goes on to explain to Madara that a figure as powerful as him simply can't enter current realities without throwing off the balance of this current reality's integrity. That is to say that Madara re-entering this era has messed with the integrity of Boruto's current timeline. However, Madara is intrigued by what Shiro is saying, as Madara has deduced that Shiro seemingly knew that Madara was going to come back, that he had a plan somehow for Madara's return. And thus Madara asks Shiro if he was resurrected on purpose, to which Shiro responds by saying that anything is possible. In fact, I wouldn't deem it unlikely that God himself brought you back. Now, as for who Shiro is referring to when he says God, we can't 100% know. While there is a chance that he is talking about Hagoromo, who is literally the person who brought Madara back, there's also the possibility that Shiro is talking about a different kind of god, like a Shibai type of god. We can't know for certain. However, Shiro immediately swaps the topic of conversation and says the world is in a terrible decline. Well, after the conclusion of the Fourth Great Shinobi World War, the ninja world knew a level of peace unprecedented, as Naruto shined as the beacon of light that allowed for the 5 great nations to unify, and this incredibly powerful unity of the 5 greatest powers on Earth allowed for any Earth-based threats to be stamped out before they even became legitimate issues. Unfortunately, the Earth was immediately presented with non-Earth-based threats. And as Shiro is explaining this, Madara says out loud, the alien clan of the Otsutsuki, telling Shiro that he understands this threat because of the notes that he was able to stumble upon in the room where he was kept in a giant test tube. Now, it's this point that Shiro reveals that this universe is different from the standard universe, because when Momoshiki descended down to Earth in this universe, the entirety of the allied shinobi forces, Naruto and Sasuke included, barely stood a chance against Momoshiki's ridiculous power. And thus when Momoshiki arrived, Naruto and Sasuke led the shinobi allied forces into combat against Momoshiki to try and arrest his journey to consume all of Earth's chakra, but Momoshiki completely decimated the allied shinobi forces, with Naruto being the only person strong enough to legitimately hold any kind of fight against him. And thus Naruto, using the entirety of his power, was able to fend off the Otsutsuki invasion. However, after successfully defending Earth, Naruto either disappeared or died. And thus, very similarly to the Boruto worlds right now, the ninja world lost its beacon of hope. The allied shinobi forces had been decimated by a power even greater than that of Kaguya, the entity that they had fought in the Fourth Great Shinobi World War. And even Naruto, the sun that nourished the entire ninja world, was barely strong enough to even repel the onslaught. And thus, upon Naruto's disappearance or possible death, the entire shinobi world started to be driven by fear, and soon it fragmented, with some believing that Naruto had abandoned the allied shinobi forces and others believing that he had died heroically fighting for them, with the most radical amongst them believing that the Otsutsuki were gods that deserved reverence. And thus multiple different factions spun out of the allied shinobi forces. And thus, while the majority of shinobi stayed loyal to the allied shinobi forces, a section almost as large as those who remained loyal took up the cause of the Otsutsuki, becoming a massive rogue ninja state, becoming known simply as the Whites. For the white cloaks with Otsutsuki markings they all wore. And now, as these two idealistically complete opposite but almost equally powerful entities co-inhabitate the entirety of the ninja continent, clashes between the two of them are constant and unending. And thus now, even though Momoshiki is nowhere to be found on Earth, the Otsutsuki threat is still very much alive and well on Earth, as now humans act out the Otsutsuki's will. And thus Shiro reveals to Madara that the time of war has come. Countries have closed their borders. All resources are used for weapons. Feudal lords have gone into hiding, and shinobi villages have either closed their doors to everybody or been abandoned completely. Lawlessness has spread rampant. Battles are a daily occurrence, and there's no sign left of the unity and mutual support that existed while Naruto was still around. The world is bathed in blood, but not just the blood of shinobi, but also the elderly and the young and the civilians and the innocent. And thus Shiro asks Madara, doesn't it sound familiar? And it's at this moment that Madara realizes that it's exactly like the Warring States period. And that is so cool. That's so cool. Because what do you mean Hashirama's now dead and a new idealistically changed Madara now has to be responsible for the complete and total arrest of a new Warring States period? Madara, who is now the reincarnation of Indra and Ashura, living the role of both his previous life and Hashirama's, has to re-put together a fragmented world to make sure it doesn't slide into the era that he was responsible for perpetuating in his actual life. Oh, that's such good writing. I mean, as a Rinnegan wielder, because he was able to achieve Hagoromo's DNA, and as the current reincarnation of Asura and Indra, he is the actual walking physical embodiment of the ending of the cycle of hatred. However, now, as the walking physical embodiment of the ending of the cycle of hatred between the Senju and the Uchiha, he now has to act as the mediator between a new cycle of hatred that's being perpetuated between aliens and humans. That is... oh, it's sick. And thus Madara, upon hearing this news, thinks to himself, I guess it's all circled back. Now Shiro continues on by saying, at this point your return gains symbolic connotation, as if the situation itself has somehow summoned your spirit. Madara tells him that everything has fallen into place too well. Why should he believe Shiro? To which Shiro responds to by saying, I'm not asking you to believe my word. I'm just an observer and share only what I know. And maybe soon that you see well enough that I wasn't lying to you. Yes, while the fate of the seventh is still unknown, people have forgotten all about it, as humans remembered that they love one thing more than anything, and that is blood, especially if it's the blood of an enemy. And while all this is going on, the aliens haven't bothered humanity, leaving them alone to devour each other like they always have. Before Shiro is able to possibly bore Madara with his speech, he feels a disturbance in the force and thinks to himself, is that... what a coincidence, as he immediately tells Madara that he feels a space-time ninjutsu window opening up near the Land of Fire, and he's almost certain that it's from outside of Earth, and that coming through this window is a whole new level of chakra that he should feel fairly soon. And thus Madara begins to get excited and tells him, I'll meet him, re-divert his space-time ninjutsu with that ability of yours, and send me to his current location, somewhere open where me and him can fight with a little bit of space. But Shiro says it's too risky. Sending you and re-diverting him will be straining on me, and you'll be low on chakra after trying to use your teleportation jutsu again. Madara tells Shiro to just do as he says. After all, Shiro wanted to help him, didn't he? And thus Madara opens a space-time ninjutsu portal with his Rinnegan. Something that we talked about is a technical possibility in our last episode covering this manga. And out of that portal, Madara pops into a scraggly earthen landscape. And we see Shiro use an ability specific to this manga called Ninja Art Way Blocking. And while this technically isn't a jutsu that exists, it's absolutely a jutsu that could. I mean, fundamentally, being able to sense where portals that are opened from elsewhere are going to pop up is an ability that we've seen before. As Naruto was able to sense where Kaguya was going to pop out with Uramatsu Hirasaka using his Sage Mode, and Sasuke was able to track Kaguya between dimensions using his 6-Tome Rinnegan. And while we've never seen anybody try to counteract somebody else's space-time ninjutsu, in a world where there's a somewhat constant threat of Otsutsuki popping to your planet using Uramatsu Hirasaka, a ninja technique of being able to re-divert these portals to possible other faraway locations would be ridiculously useful, and thus Shiro may be acting as a silent protector of Earth, redirecting these portals from the Otsutsuki away from Earth. Regardless, it's a jutsu that I like a lot, and I feel like works really well in the Naruto universe, especially in a post-Otsutsuki era. But it seems as though directing Madara and this Otsutsuki threat to the same location is enough to tap Shiro's strength. And as Shiro falls to one knee, we for the first time see Shiro's left eye, which appears to be just a standard left eye. But it could also be a snake eye. Ninja art way blocking manifests very snakily, and the pupil in his left eye does seem slightly long. And thus the possibility of Shiro being something like a clone created from Sasuke's cells by Orochimaru doesn't seem unlikely to me. But who is Madara to face off against in this barren wasteland? Well, none other than Isshiki. And as Madara faces him down, both Madara and Isshiki deliver some ridiculously sick one-liners that both of them are known for. As Madara looks upon this brand new odd visage of Isshiki and says, "Here you are. Are you ready to dance?" Which Isshiki responds to by saying, "Since when do cockroaches jump under the boot on their own?" And that's just a sick line. And with that ends chapter 4. So let's get on to chapter 5. Chapter 5 opens with this iteration of Madara facing down Isshiki. But before Isshiki is able to figure out what's happening, Madara disappears. And before we know it, he's right in front of Isshiki, trying to strike him. But Isshiki jumps backwards and dodges, barely dodging the overhead gunbai slash from Madara. Madara presses the offensive, swinging his gunbai at him once again, but Isshiki continues to retreat. Madara then plants his gunbai in the ground, uses it as a pole, swings his body around, and plants a kick into Ishiki's chest that he blocks, but it's delivered with enough power that Isshiki slides backwards. Madara continues to press the offensive as he once again closes in on Isshiki with his gunbai as he thinks to himself, what an annoying fan. Then uses Sukuna Hikuna on the fan to make it the size of a ping pong paddle, thus making it completely irrelevant as a weapon, and thus Madara looks at it and says, turning my gunbai into a ping pong paddle in an instant. Weird that he knows what ping pong is, but I guess I can live with that. And thus Madara discards the weapon, so I guess there goes the gunbai. But then again, it didn't play that huge role in regular Naruto either. Now, this technique does perplex Madara as he looks at the eyes of Isshiki and thinks to himself, Byakugan? No, this must be the technique of his right eye. But before he's able to do too much observing, he's littered with chakra rods, all piercing his arm. As he thinks to himself, blades seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Now, we know obviously that Isshiki pulled these chakra rods out of his dimension, threw them at Madara while they were still very little, and then made them larger as they made contact with his skin. But Madara doesn't know that. However, Madara has been watching all of this with his Rinnegan, and thus Madara begins to immediately deduce what could possibly be going on with Isshiki, as he thinks to himself that Ishiki's right eye must allow for him to shrink the size of things and summon weapon. But Madara immediately dismisses that thought as he thinks, no, that's too sudden. It's something more complex than just weapon summoning. But Madara, even though his right arm is now littered with chakra rods, so remember, he has Hashirama's regeneration factor that's basically nothing to him, continues to press Isshiki, but this time to make sure that Isshiki can no longer retreat, a wood clone and wood dragon appear behind Isshiki and put him in a rear naked choke to make sure he doesn't go anywhere. Madara then closes in with his right arm filled with chakra rods and is about to slam them into Ishiki's face, and Isshiki realizes that the wood release is paralyzing him, and thus the only way to make sure that these rods don't slam through his skull is to use his right eye to shrink them once again, or possibly de-summon them. Now, the idea of the wood release paralyzing Isshiki isn't that crazy of an idea. Wood release is known to counteract tailed beast chakra, and as tailed beast chakra does tie its roots back to the 10 tails and the Otsutsuki, the fact that wood release would be able to sap the energy of the Otsutsuki and maybe even paralyze them is not that crazy of an idea. And therefore, before Madara is able to have these chakra rods slammed through his skull, Isshiki uses his right eye to shrink the rods, making them fall out of Madara's arm, and he sees as the rods plink off the ground with his Rinnegan eyes. And thus Madara immediately deduces that Ishiki's able to control the size of objects with his right eye. But as he's making this deduction, above him appears two gigantic black boxes, the same ones that Isshiki used to pin Naruto to the ground. But before we move any further with that fight, we cut to a beat up and quivering white, and over him is standing a silhouetted long-haired character who's telling him, I caught you, you little rat. And this person, who looks like a member of the Akatsuki phasing into their hideout, says, you know, I'm supposed to take you in for interrogation, but that takes so long. So maybe we can skip that routine and I can get this information out of you right here, right now. And it's at this moment that we see in a panel of just just her eyes. That this character has 2 3-tome Sharingan, as they're asking this quivering white, where's the 7th? And as his parent Uchiha brandishes a knife, the white simply says, I don't know, I just joined for money. And this Uchiha tells him, well, whatever, I'm too lazy to lead you anywhere in the first place. I'll be laughed at for bringing in a loser like you into camp anyways. As she kicks the white unconscious, as she thinks to herself that the enemy is getting more desperate in who they're recruiting into their ranks. But she stares at this unconscious man, she hears a hey, and she turns around and a smile encroaches her face as she says, oh daddy, hi. But the white, who believes this daughter's father appearing on the scene is his opportunity to get away, reveals that he's not actually unconscious as he stands up and screams for help. But he's immediately knocked back down with a chop by, apparently, Narita Uchiha, the youngest daughter of Sasuke and Sakura. Now, when Sasuke stumbles upon this scene, he tells Narita that she's been overdoing it, but she tells Sasuke rather slyly that he just fell out of a tree, to which Sasuke responds to, oh, did the tree smash up his face? To which Narita says, correct. Did the tree destroy his wrist? He asks, to which Narita responds by saying, have you never fallen out of a tree before? Sasuke then turns to a battlefield strewn with unconscious bodies as he looks to her and says, oh yeah, did trees do all of that? What a dangerous force this must be. On top of this, you've been told all spies found near camps need to be brought in for questioning. They all could be holding on to important information, especially regarding Naruto's location. And thus anybody who can still be questioned on this battlefield is being brought into camp. I'll arrange it. And thus brings a smile to Narita's face as she realizes that Sasuke is coming to camp, and thus she believes that Sakura and Naruto will be very happy. And as the two of them begin to walk in that direction, she tells Sasuke that she's missed him. Now we then cut back to Madara and Isshiki's battle, as Isshiki realizes that the Madara that had chakra rods jammed into its arm was apparently a wood clone, and he revels at its durability. And this is actually a rather impressive callback from Deontay art, as wood clones are canonically the strongest out of all shadow clones, being able to take on the highest level of injuries without disappearing. But in this moment, Isshiki realizes that Madara was using his wood clones to try and suss out his abilities. He thinks to himself that it doesn't matter because a human can't jump over its head. A human stands no chance in combat against a god. But before he can get too self-righteous, Madara covers the entire battlefield in a deep forest emergence. A deep forest emergence that Ishiki's able to dodge, however, a deep forest emergence that comes with a bunch of blooming flowers. And as Madara stares out over the battlefield, now completely covered in his generated wood, he thinks, I must have overdone it with the size. Well, that's his problem, which is just such a Madara thing to say. And Madara thinks to himself, well, now the fun begins, as Isshiki stares out over this now completely changed battlefield, and thus ends chapter 5. And thus we head directly into chapter 6. Now chapter 6 opens with Deep Forest Emergence working in the way that we've seen Deep Forest Emergence work before, especially when used by Madara. The petals and flowers attached to all of the wood lifted to the earth begin to release pollen. And while this pollen had been shown in the 4th grade Shinobi World War to be able to put people to sleep and then eventually kill them if they inhaled too much, that doesn't appear to be what the pollen is doing this time around. However, on top of releasing pollen, all of the wood release also begin to fire spikes at Ishiki's location. And this is absolutely something that somebody can do with wood release. Not only is it a variation of things that we've seen done with wood release previously, but it's also a rather direct callback to the attack used by the Ten Tails to kill Neji. Now Ishiki is able to fly away from this flurry of wooden spikes, flying high up into the air. And for those of you who are wondering why Ishiki doesn't just shrink all of these incoming splinters, well, that's for a reason that I referenced earlier. See, this iteration of Madara kind of has the perfect kit to fight against Isshiki. Why? Well, because Isshiki can't shrink living things, and wood release is a living thing. While Isshiki can absolutely shrink in jutsu, was revealed when Kashin Koji used the real fire of Mount Samadhi, or whatever it was, that Isshiki couldn't absorb real life things, only jutsu. And therefore, because wood release is alive, it can't be shrunk by Isshiki, and as wood release technically falls outside of the standard purview of jutsu, absorbing it could be difficult, but we have seen it absorbed previously. However, mind you, this is Isshiki, and Isshiki doesn't have a karma marking, and therefore technically Isshiki has no ninjutsu absorption abilities. So really his only option is shrinking, which he can't do to wood release. Anyways, Isshiki is so caught up in trying to dodge all of these giant splinters that Madara is able to catch him by surprise, grabbing his face, specifically the right side of his face. And thus Madara is able to pull off a jutsu that we've never seen before. Sealing technique, Seal of Pitch Darkness. Now Isshiki is able to generate some kind of energy ball in his hand and use it to blast Madara away. And while Madara uses his Susanoo ribcage to soften the blow, it popped out Madara's shoulder. Now that's not that big of a deal because he has Hashirama's healing factor and also so it's not that hard to pop back in a shoulder. Still, it's damage. But what is this technique that Madara just used against Isshiki? Well, apparently it's a sealing technique that Madara created to use against Obito if Obito ever tried to not return Madara's eyes. And that's a really cool idea. I mean, I've talked at length that Madara's plan for the 4th Great Shinobi World War, and therefore the Eye of the Moon plan, was absolutely asinine. What if the people that he gave the Rinnegan to didn't want to buy into his plan? That was a high-level possibility. And thus the idea that one of the most intelligent ninja of all time created a sealing jutsu specifically to seal away the Rinnegan if they were used by somebody else that wasn't him is a genius-level fanfiction idea. However, Madara acknowledges the fact that the seal will not last forever, and therefore at some point Isshiki will be able to break out the seal and get his right eye's abilities back. For the moment, Ishiki's right eye is cast into eternal darkness, and thus his ability to reach into his pocket dimension, shrink, or grow the size of anything is currently suspended. And the idea of Madara, an EMS wielder, being able to darken other people's eyes is so intelligent. Madara, who's supposedly existing as the current manifestation of rising above the Uchiha darkness, somebody whose eyes themselves cannot darken because of his EMS. Being able to darken the eye of somebody else using a sealing technique is a really cool tie-in to his Uchiha lineage and how the Sharingan works. Now, this pisses Isshiki off, and thus he flies down to Madara's location and says, "Before dying, how were you able to redirect my portal? I didn't even know humans could have access to this information." To which Madara responds to by saying, "I've got lots of surprises left for you, unicorn." And thus he thinks to himself, did I stumble upon one of Judashiki's henchmen? Now, as to who Judashiki is, I can't say. It's obviously an OC, probably a higher level Otsutsuki than Isshiki, presumably somewhere in a Shibai-esque role, because it's important to note that this manga was written in 2024 before the reveal of Shibai. Maybe, actually. I don't think so. I think Shibai probably existed, but still. Anyways, Isshiki, thinking that Madara is one of Judashiki's henchmen, tells Isshiki that he no longer has to hold back, and he tells Madara this. But Madara begins to chuckle at this, saying, "You don't have to hold yourself back. You've been trying this entire time. Your eye is shut off. You can't use your dojutsu. I am in full control of this fight." It's disappointing, really. I expected better from you. So please, show me what you can do already. And this is the fun part about two antagonists going face to face against each other, because the protagonist never gets to talk down to the antagonist, and yet we have them both here barking at each other. Now, Isshiki begins to hold his face as he says, "Empty talk. I don't need eyes to defeat you. And unfortunately for you, this seal will not last." But before Isshiki can push the offensive against Madara, Madara appears behind him, activating the Asura Path to create a chainsaw from his hand. And yes, he can do that. The Asura Path allows you to mechanize your body. Nagato turned his arm into a rocket launcher. There is literally no reason Madara can't sprout a chainsaw from his arm. And while Isshiki is able to barely dodge the swipe of this chainsaw, he thinks to himself, I was barely able to dodge that. The air feels as though it's heavy. And as Isshiki is literally on all fours, Madara activates Sage Art, Gale-style Fang of Light, the jutsu that he used in Naruto as Jubidara. His mouth-style laser that fires at the speed of light and literally cut a chakra rod in half. A technique so powerful it was able to destroy True Seeker orbs. I mean, it is next level cutting ability. And as this laser is hurtling its way towards Isshiki, Madara thinks to himself that Isshiki has slowed down, and that the Deep Forest Emergence has begun to work out for Madara, as it's released Madara's chakra and made the surrounding area a greenhouse-like place with Madara's chakra. That is to say that this battlefield has become so dense with Madara's chakra that it's actually hard for other people to use their own, and that the battlefield is so dense with Madara's chakra that even if Isshiki had access to his dojutsu, he wouldn't be able to use it, as becoming smaller would simply make him more susceptible to the density of Madara's chakra. Now, this isn't how we've seen Deep Forest Emergence used in the past, or really chakra. This is kind of akin to chakra taking on properties of something like a monozone in Black Clover, and thus Isshiki, who is slowed, is barely able to avoid the mouth laser as it slices off his horde. And thus Isshiki thinks to himself, as his hand begins to glow with aura, it appears I have to use. And Madara appears behind him with his chainsaw arm and goes to slash through Isshiki. But the ground begins to shake as Madara realizes that Isshiki has accumulated an insane amount of chakra. And Isshiki tells Madara that this is the end. And while I may not come out unscathed out of this technique, he will surely die. As Isshiki screams out to Madara to observe the power of the Otsutsuki, as a gigantic explosion in the shape of Deidara's C0 attack bursts out and completely destroys the entire battlefield. And thus ends chapter 6. So what do you guys think is going to happen? Has Madara been defeated? Does he have the chops to beat Isshiki? Will this be the end of their fight? Let me know in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go prepare an argument about why Arcane sucks.